Chris Hedges, the globally significant political commentator, journalist, writer, and host of the Chris Hedges Report, was part of a panel including my colleague, the Honourable Craig Murray, former British ambassador, now Workers' Party candidate in Blackburn at the general election, and our frequent guest here, Richard Medhurst. By all accounts, it was an outstanding success, and the tape of the meeting, the recording of the meeting, should be studied by everyone. I'm glad to say Chris joins us now. There's so much to talk about, Chris. Let me dive right into it. The situation of the Russian Navy being just outside the marker of Miami, which once upon a time would have been the beginning of World War III, appears to have not troubled the horses too much. Perhaps because there are so many other flashpoints that are more likely to cause the beginning of World War III. The particular one being the apparently imminent Israeli invasion of Lebanon. You and I have watched and reported on many such confrontations. Are you expecting one for real, or is this all bluster?
I don't think it's bluster, but I also think it's suicidal on the part of Israel, because the last time they went into Lebanon, they had to scurry back behind the Lebanese borders. It was at best a stalemate, and I think there's strong argument that Israel suffered a defeat. The IDF is not the kind of vaunted mythical army that it pretends to be. The Palestinians in Gaza call them the Diaper Army because they all wear diapers inside their armored personnel carriers as they blast Gaza into rubble and then leave piles of diapers in remote areas where they feel it's safe to get out of their vehicles. A very similar situation to what I saw in Bosnia. I was in Sarajevo during the war. The Serbs sheltered behind their artillery, and we were pounded by not only heavy guns, but tank shells that were just essentially in fixed positions. But once that armor was decimated by NATO, the Serbs didn't have much fight in them. And I suspect the same is true with Israel. They have not now, what are we in, 8 months of this genocide in Gaza, and they haven't come close to achieving their purported goal, which is to defeat Hamas. Well, although, as you and I know, this is really a war against the Palestinian people. It's not ultimately a war against Hamas. So, that kind of hubris is dangerous. But I mean, from a distance, and I actually just came back from the Middle East, just came back from Egypt, it does look like that there is a pretty serious mobilization on the part of Israel that could very well, as you point out, culminate with a cross-border incursion into Lebanon, southern Lebanon.
Given that 20 years on nearly from that stalemate or beating, was only one or the other, there was nobody could define it as an Israeli success the last time they did this. Given that Hezbollah is maybe roughly 10 times more powerful than it was then, it's an army of 100,000 men. It has missile technology, drone technology, anti-aircraft capability, which was undreamt of in 2006. Given that, why would Israel take what, as you described it, would take such a suicidal action? I mean, is it possible that, as other leaders have become in wartime, that the Israeli leadership has simply become unhinged?
I think it's very much like the American military in the sense that there really is no end game. There's a kind of reaction. I mean, what is happening in Gaza is probably best defined as state vengeance. But even the Americans are asking, well, where's the day after? What is it going to look like? I'm not sure those are questions the Israelis are asking. Those aren't questions the Americans really asked in a meaningful way in Iraq. in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Libya, countries of which they ended up kind of either completely destroying or bifurcating, in the case of Iraq, into three distinct entities, or in the case of Libya, creating these failed states. So I'm not sure that, and that's one of the things that's frightening. I don't think the Israelis have asked those kinds of questions about where they're going in Gaza, and I'm not sure they're asking those kinds of questions should they carry out what looks like an imminent assault against Lebanon.
Now, I was not surprised, I'm sure you were not, that notwithstanding Joe Biden's almost bottomless grace towards Netanyahu, he's given him everything, money, weapons, diplomatic cover, vetoes. But despite all that largesse, Netanyahu made a video and stabbed Joe Biden in the back. A video that will be played endlessly by Donald Trump's campaign, in which Netanyahu effectively damns the administration of Joe Biden. Tell us what you know about that and what its likely impact will be.
Well, the impact, I mean, first of all, Netanyahu is kind of joined at the hip with Trump. He much prefers Trump in the White House. Trump is even more pliable than Biden, although Biden, of course, is pretty pliable. I think the reaction that the Israelis have had is more one to the rhetorical stance of the Biden administration, because except for one arms shipment that was slightly delayed, the Americans have given the Israelis everything they want. The figure now is 68%, I believe, of the munitions that Israel uses, having depleted the stockpiles they have, come from the United States. But Biden hasn't been pliable enough. And that's the power of the Zionist lobby. Ilan Pape just wrote a very good book on it. And it has a stranglehold on both parties. But the Trump administration is even more obsequious to the interests of the Zionist lobby than the Biden administration, although I would say that margin of difference is pretty small. So there's no... if Biden loses, Biden's in big trouble, by the way, as we approach the November election, for not only for Gaza, but only for this kind of metal fog that is becoming harder and harder to cover up. But if Netanyahu gets Trump, that's even better than Biden. So that's the irony, that the Netanyahu government is quite happy to sacrifice Biden, which is, of course, what they're doing. And we have this invitation of Netanyahu coming to speak before the Congress and not being invited to the White House, because I think the Biden administration fully realizes that, in fact, Netanyahu is politically a hostile force.
As he was, of course, against Joe's boss, Barack Obama. Israeli interference in American elections is scarcely concealed. I want to talk to you about North Korea, but before I do, on the mental fog that has descended on Joe Biden, which is now so extreme as to be virtually so dense that he can't see through it. The appearance at the Tonys of Hillary Clinton got me thinking that maybe it's not yet too late for Hillary. That maybe Joe, in any case, will have to be pushed over the side of the boat before the starters' orders are declared in November. Is that fanciful on my part?
I don't think it's fanciful if the deterioration remains as pronounced or becomes more pronounced. Remember, he has a debate. And if Biden clicks out, he has a habit of kind of freezing and then not knowing where he is. And not sure what he's supposed to say. I mean, if he just turns in a horrendous performance at the debate, which is very possible given how scripted and controlled he now is within a public arena, I don't know that the Democrats will have a choice. Whether they reach to the bottom of the barrel to grab Hillary Clinton. I mean, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, is kind of the name that's often floated. But no, I don't think that Biden's clear cognitive disability is sustainable. And especially if there are more egregious examples. I mean, the only reason the Democrats have agreed to these debates is because Biden is so weak in the polls. They wanted no debates, and they had no debates in the primaries. Biden didn't have any real competitors in the primaries. So, no, I think there's clearly, I don't know if it's terror, but certain. The Democratic Party leadership is very, very frightened. I mean, they read the poll numbers like everyone else. They are probably even more fully aware of Biden's, difficulty, mental and cognitive difficulties than the public is. So no, I don't. I think it remains possible. It would call for Biden to essentially announce that he's not running, and then the Democratic Party, which selected Biden in the first place. I mean, he was anointed when he didn't in the primaries when he ran about 4 years ago. He wasn't doing very well. Nobody wanted him, and then there was pressure led by Obama and the Democratic Party leadership to get everyone to drop out, and then of course they rigged the system against Bernie Sanders. So, I don't think it's an impossibility.
I mean, nobody could look at Joe Biden and say what that guy needs is another 4-year term as the president of the United States. Nobody could conceivably think that, which would, of course, give us a president, Kamala Harris, who doesn't even have the excuse of being extremely old.
Right. Yeah, she's one of the least popular politicians on. But she's absolutely, she doesn't exude any kind of personality at all. So I don't know that they would go for Kamala Harris. Who knows I don't know what the internal thinking is. I mean, a figure like Gavin Newsom could be a powerful counterweight to Trump. But, who knows? The Democratic Party is controlled by powerful moneyed interests like Goldman Sachs, and those are the people pulling the strings and deciding who's going to run, who's going to best serve their interess. It's which is how we got Biden in the first place.
Turning to North Korea, Putin arrived to the heartiest of welcomes, biggest red carpet I've ever seen. What's your take on what Putin is doing there?
Well, we know what Putin is doing because the goal of the proxy war in Ukraine had two primary objectives. The first was isolating Putin from Europe. They achieved that. And the second was degrading the power of the Russian military. And although Russia is certainly now winning the war, and as I think we all knew, in a war of attrition was inevitable, but it certainly damaged the Russian military. So Putin was pushed into the embrace of China, pushed into the embrace of other countries that are treated like pariahs, including North Korea. And what they're doing is building a kind of alliance. I wouldn't call it, like the non-aligned movement of Tito and Nehru and Nasser, but some kind of a counterweight and a powerful counterweight to American hegemony. Remember, it all revolves around the dollar. The day the dollar is no longer the world's reserve currency is the day the American empire collapses, because it can no longer sustain itself financially. Nobody will buy our debt. When the pound sterling in the 50s was removed as the world's currency, that was a severe economic blow against Great Britain. The same would be true. It would even be exacerbated by the United States. So that's what we're clearly moving towards. And the consequences of that for the American empire, and ultimately, by extension, for Israel, is devastating, if not fatal.
Chris Hedges, as always, an education talking with you. And everyone, please watch Chris and Craig Murray and Richard Medhurst. Their public meeting was first class, world class. Chris Hedges, political commentator, journalist, writer, and host of the Chris Hedges Report.